Bosses are probably one of my favorite things in all of gaming. And while it might not be your favorite thing in gaming, I think everyone can agree that there's a certain amount of coolness that comes with a boss fight. But you can't just give an enemy a bunch of health and expect someone to think it's a boss fight. There's meticulous design choices that game developers make to differentiate the great boss fights and the not so great boss fights. And in this video, I'd like to explore what makes a boss fight so good, while giving some examples of some of my personal favorite boss fights and some of my personal least favorite boss fights. But before we get into the nitty-gritty about what makes these fights so fantastic, I want to first look at why a game developer would even consider adding a boss fight to their game. To me, a boss fight is more of a cherry on top of something that's already really good. Of course, with the exception of games that are entirely just boss rushes. I think it's pretty common to remember an area of a game specifically because of a really cool boss fight that was there. They're more of a way for a game developer to embody the identity of whatever area you just completed. And in many cases, but not all cases, to provide a final challenge. Using Castle Crashers as an example here, although the basic combat in this game is pretty fun and destroying waves of enemies can be enjoyable, there's a certain point where it gets a little monotonous and boring, don't you think? Well, to be honest, you probably didn't think that. The wide variety of boss fights that are fun, interesting, and difficult do a fantastic job at breaking up the slightly repetitive gameplay that this game has. And in general, I think these bosses embody a lot of what this game is, making the game that much more memorable. Nobody's saying Wave 3 of Fire Demons was one of their favorite fights in the volcano level, but I'm sure everyone talks about the annoying Ice King that always teleports around and laughs at you because you can never hit him. So what factors make a boss fight iconic and what makes a boss fight forgettable? Well, in my opinion, a boss fight has to nail two different aspects to become great. The first one is staging, referring to how the boss fight looks, the music, how cool the idea is, the setup, the importance to the story. And the second one is difficulty, referring to how challenging a boss is. It's pretty self-explanatory. And yeah, it might be true that a fight doesn't need both of these to thrive, but if you look at some of the most iconic boss fights in all of gaming period, you'll start to notice that these fights excel with both of these aspects. So then what determines if a boss fight has good staging or not? Staging to me is the most important thing that a boss fight needs to nail. An easy boss fight can be really cool with staging, but a difficult boss fight can't be good with bad staging. Let's look at an example from Tears of the Kingdom. Demon Dragon Ganon is not a hard fight whatsoever, yet it can still manage to be extremely iconic just because of how much this fight has going for it. It looks cool, the music is absolutely beautiful, everything in the story is coming together, and that final hit feels amazing. But you might say it's a bit unfair to say that a final boss has good staging because obviously it's gonna be more important to the story than most fights. So what about a first boss? Well, Rayman Legends has the Dragon Boss. It's very simple and easy, but there's enough that's different here from the rest of the game to make the fight stand out. The dragon messes with the stage, the music is fun and fits the tone, and the fist makes sure that you're switching up the gameplay from the base game. I think a big thing that hurt Mario Wonder is its boss fights. They're not really difficult at all, and their staging is terrible. I will always immediately take points off if a game reuses the exact same boss fight with barely changing things, and Bowser Jr. gets really annoying after the first one. There's nothing special really going on, the theme's fine, and all you do is jump on his head. There's no real point to these fights. And don't get me started on the airship parts. Those are a different story. The final boss of this game is pretty good. The Bowser fight is solid, but it kind of comes out of nowhere and is a little too straightforward for my liking. That's why I mentioned the difficulty is an important factor. Most of the bosses that people remember are the harder bosses. Think Sans, Senator Armstrong, Cynthia from Pokemon. Without that extra difficulty, none of these bosses would be nearly as iconic as they are. I mean, I can even take an example I already mentioned. Demon Dragon Ganon isn't that iconic. He's actually way outclassed by himself. The Ganondorf fight in Tears of the Kingdom is unbelievably good. It doesn't have the same scope that the dragon fight has, but it balances difficulty and staging better to create a fight that is iconic not just because of how cool it looks, but also how difficult it is. Pure Vessel's in the same boat too. This is a decently difficult fight for when you'll reach it, and it does a lot to make this fight feel cool. The staging is good. The fact that there's no music at all until you walk in, and then BAM! The music kicks in and the fight really starts. Without difficulty, a boss fight really doesn't have as much purpose. Don't get me wrong, Colgera looks great. This fight feels great. The music is transcendent, but it's just not that difficult. And so it's hard for this fight to hold a candle to many of the others in this game. With that being said though, I would pretty much always rather have a boss fight than not have a boss fight. But I will always appreciate games that go the extra mile to make some truly amazing boss fights over the games that don't even try. For me personally, these fights are the main thing that I remember from video games. If you mention the name of a video game, the first thing that comes to my mind is the boss fights in it. And I'm sure there's tons of other people like that as well. So moral of the story, boss fights are very cool and awesome. And even the really bad ones can sometimes be iconic. While there is a formula to make a great boss fight, your boss fight doesn't have to follow it. That's everything I got to say in this video. Subscribe because I upload every 2 weeks, and watch some of my older stuff if you can't wait that long. Bye-bye!